From the early beginnings of Hollywood's superstar family to what the new generation of the Wayans family is up to today, here's what happened to the Wayans family. Guys, we don't talk about it enough. Making a name for yourself in Hollywood's cutthroat environment is an accomplishment in itself, but making a name for your entire family? Now that's impressive. That's a feat you've probably never heard of. Well, cue the Wayans family, a 10-sibling family where every one of them has a hand in show business. You're probably thinking of the Wayans Bros already, a 5-season sitcom that ran from 1995 to 1999 on the WB, which featured real-life brothers Sean and Marlon, who were the youngest two of the Wayans family. Did you know Kenan directed the first and by far most memorable Scary Movie? Since his directorial debut in 1987, Kenan has made it a point to cast at least one of his siblings in his movies. Damon Wayans is just the same, and he had his younger brother Sean voice the lead character in the short-lived WB Kids show, Wayans Head. One thing's clear, the Wayans family sticks together. Studios were also made aware of the fact that Kenan brought on his siblings Damon, Marlon, Sean, Dwayne, and sister Kim with him for Fox's sketch comedy show In Living Color. The show might have run from 1990 until 1994, but everyone knows it peaked in 1992. Arguably, that was because the Wayans family were all featured as regulars on the show. Then, shortly after the show's second season, Kenan had a dispute with the network over censorship of his content and unauthorized reruns. He walked away from In Living Color, and even though the rest of his siblings were doing well enough for themselves on the show, they decided to up and leave too. Kim and Sean stayed on because they were contractually obligated to, but when the two protested after Fox announced Jamie Foxx would be coming on the show during the Christmas special, it was clear that without the Wayans, In Living Color couldn't thrive. Ultimately, Fox pulled the plug on the show in 1994. If you take a look at the sort of roles members of the Wayans brothers have had since the 90s, it's almost all in comedy. Besides a few action films that Sean starred in, or a few that Kenan directed, the siblings and their kids have almost exclusively worked in comedy. Production got the sense that the Wayans family had a knack for comedy when Sean and Marlon were pitching their screenplay, Don't Be a Menace. This was around the time when Kenan had already established himself in the industry, and the younger sibling duo were trying their hand at it too. But like anyone trying to make it big in Hollywood, Sean and Marlon and every one of the Wayans family siblings actually had a hard time initially. In Kenan's case, Hollywood Shuffle, his directorial debut, might have done well, but his later films, including I'm Gonna Get You, weren't very well received. Circling back to Sean and Marlon, they realized that production houses would only take on the screenplay for Don't Be a Menace if they made several changes to the script. The Wayans brothers didn't like the changes that were being made and had to bounce back from one company to another before finally having the film made. The same thing happened when they were pitching the Wayans brothers too. They had their hearts set on NBC to pick up the pilot, but the network stated they'd only accept the show if they had more creative control over it. Eventually, the brothers decided to go with the WB, which at the time didn't have nearly as big of a budget as NBC. Interestingly, The Wayans Brothers was one of the shows that kicked off a new era for the WB. It was the first sitcom added to the network's 2-hour Wednesday special, which was a big hit among audiences. Everyone loved the show and was sad to see it go after 5 seasons. Since we're talking about the Wayans family, after all, we have to talk about Scary Movie and White Chicks. In the year 2000, the first installment of the Scary Movie franchise was released, and it marked the careers of some of the most familiar faces in Hollywood. We're talking about Anna Faris, Carmen Electra, and Kurt Fuller, to name a few. The first movie grossed over $278 million against a $19 million budget and was an instant hit. Scary Movie was also a Wayans family collaborative effort, since Sean and Marlon wrote and starred in the film while Kenan directed it. The film was also a collaboration between the Wayans brothers, Entertainment and Dimension Films, but they only collaborated once. You see, after the success of the first film, Dimension Films wanted part 2 within a year. The Wayans brothers rejected the idea, and this caused tensions with the company. Dimension Films went ahead with their plan anyway, and the result was a lukewarm reception to Scary Movie 2. For the third film, the brothers announced they were taking a hiatus from the franchise for a while and focusing on other projects. Cue White Chicks. If you haven't watched it, you've probably seen a clip or two of the iconic movie on social media. Today, White Chicks has emerged as a cult classic with a massive following and people ranting and raving about it globally. But at the time, critics largely disapproved of the movie and gave it a cold reception. Speaking of which, we have to give credit where credit is due. Robert Townsend did a lot for the Wayans family, even if they don't want to talk about it publicly. Today, you'd think that Kenan, the second oldest of the Wayans siblings, is responsible for bringing the family to mainstream stardom, but some would argue it was Robert who changed the family's trajectory forever. In 1987, when Hollywood Shuffle was released, it was one of the highest grossing comedy movies of its time. It was also distinguished for being a self-financed film by both Kenan and Robert, and one of the first films written and directed by people of color. Back in those days, there were only a handful of minority actors and even fewer directors and producers in Hollywood. Kenan was only just starting as a writer and director, but Robert had already established himself as an actor. He had a major role in the World War II drama film, A Soldier's Story, and was itching for more projects. Unfortunately, his agent told him they only made one black film a year. This inspired Robert to take up Kenan's idea for Hollywood Shuffle, and he financed $60,000 of his life savings for the movie. According to the Hollywood legend, the remaining $100,000 budget was paid for by maxing out credit cards. Anyway, to cut a long story short, Hollywood Shuffle received positive reviews from critics and grossed a total of $3 million, a good investment for Robert. Much bigger than that, though. The film was centered around people of color in Hollywood and had a black cast, director, and writer. A few people have criticized the Wayans family for not crediting Robert Townsend enough for what he did for the family. According to the larger public, Kenan was the one who introduced the family to the spotlight, but some people believe that's not true. Still, we can only speculate on what happened between the two. Now, let's talk a little about what the Wayans family is up to today. Kenan's up there as one of the richest members with his multi-million-dollar empire. Of the older brothers, Damon and Dwayne are also well off, considering the work they've done in Hollywood too. Marlon's still working on stand-up gigs and has had a few live-action roles over the years, while it looks like Sean's retired from acting for good and focused on DJing, although the brothers often come together for comedy specials and tours like they did in 2013. Kim, the only sister who worked in front of the lens, could be leaning either way. While she did have starring roles in Don't Be a Menace and was featured in Living Color, she's largely stayed away from the public eye since the 90s. Deidre worked as a producer, and Kimberly, Nadia, and Devone worked as actresses for a time. But Elvira decided Hollywood just wasn't for her, even though her kids today are working in the industry. Speaking of the kids, almost all of the new generation Wayans family have had some involvement in Hollywood. Whether it was as production assistants for their uncles or work in stand-up comedy, they've all tried their hand at being big names like their parents, uncles, and aunts. Two of the cousins have a joint podcast called The Wayans Family, where they talk about everything going on in the Hollywood super family, while another one of them is taking on Kenan's example and paving the way for the new generation of Wayans. It's Damon Wayans Jr., the star of New Girl and Happy Endings. Altogether, interesting things are coming up for the new generation of the Wayans family, and we're here for it. So from the new generation of the Wayans family taking Hollywood by storm to their early beginnings in show business, that was everything about the Hollywood superfamily and why we don't talk about them enough.